This is CryptoHolics, Episode 1, with your host, Bill Cassidy. Don't forget to come and discuss today's episode at cryptochat.io. Thank you for tuning in. I'd like to welcome my guest today, Charles Hoskinson. Pleasure having you today, Charles. How you doing, man?
It's a pleasure to be on, Bill. I'm doing great.
So you've been involved in the industry for some time now, and I'm wondering if you can name off some of the projects you've volunteered your time to.
Yeah, I've been involved in quite a few projects in some capacity. And, the great part about this industry is, while it's global, you usually have an opportunity to get to know people and talk to people. So you can tangentially get involved in most things. So the first project that I started was kind of a one-off, but it was a lot of fun. It was called the Bitcoin Education Project. So I was working somewhere else at the time, and I wanted to do something in the cryptocurrency space, but I didn't know anybody, and I didn't have any VC or access. So I said, "Oh, here's what I'll do. I'll just create an educational class on Bitcoin." So I created a class called Bitcoin, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Crypto. And it was so successful that I kind of built a little bit of a project around it to bring a lot of educators together. And we ended up having a lot of different people join, like Nikos Bentonidis and Brian Goss and Adam Levine and so forth. And it gave me a great opportunity to get to know everybody in the space. The class also ended up having, I think, about 50, 60,000 students. And I personally got over 5,000 emails, and I answered every one of them. From there, some people in China really wanted to do a venture with me and give me some capital. But I didn't really have a clear business idea of where to go. And so I asked my students, if you had some capital and you could start a company to go do something to solve a problem in the cryptocurrency space, what would you do? And so I got a lot of responses back, and then I ended up getting kind of a bimodal distribution of responses. So one group said, you need to do decentralized exchange because it doesn't matter how decentralized Bitcoin gets. If the only way you can get in and out of cash is to go through a regulated exchange, then you've kind of defeated the entire purpose. Kind of like oil in the 19th century, doesn't matter where you pull it out of the ground. If you have to use the railroads to ship it, you're kind of at the mercy of Rockefeller. And similarly, the other group said, well, the big problem is value stability. We love Bitcoin. It's an amazing thing, but you can't use it as a currency and you can't use it for credit if the value goes up 20% or 30% every month. So you need to be able to peg it to either a stable currency like the US dollar, or peg it to a basket of currencies or something like kind of like what Venn does. So I asked around and I said, is there kind of a way that we could solve this problem in an elegant way where we solve both of them at the same time? So right around that time period, Dan Larimer was working on the very early versions of Bitshares. He was working at a company at the time doing some boring programming, and on his spare time he was thinking about how to solve this. So I met Dan over Bitcoin Talk, and we had a long conversation, and I said, hey, I have some capital and I kind of want to do this. And Dan said, well, that sounds fun. I have some ideas. So we partnered and we created eventually what would be known as Bitshares, and came up with the whole ProtoShares concept and a lot of that other infrastructure. So one of the things that happened after we started releasing some of these ideas, and this was a common problem that other guys in the space had, like the Color Coin guys and the Master Coin guys, is that people would say, wow, that's a really cool idea and it's nice, but can we modify it a little bit? Or can we add something to it a little bit? Or can we change this one thing? And the problem with cryptocurrencies is that once you release them, they're really hard to change. That's kind of a design feature. It's not a downside. So the answer was always no, but then it left me curious, saying, is there a way to do what JavaScript did to the web browser? Before that, it was kind of these static dull pages. There wasn't much programmability. You couldn't do much. And then JavaScript came, and all of a sudden you could do all these really cool and interesting things. So analogously, would you be able to do that with a blockchain where you have a base protocol and then you have a programming language on top of it, and you can implement sub-protocols? So you could re-implement Namecoin and Bitshares and Color Coins and all of these other things on the system. So that was always an interesting idea, but I had no clue how to do it. Ironically, had I known Sergio Lerner, we would have done something together probably, because he actually came up with an idea of how to do that in June of 2013. Yeah. Anyway, I met through Anthony Diorio much later, Vitalik Buterin, This is around October, November of 2013. And Vitalik had come up with an interesting way of doing it, which would become Ethereum. And so I helped put that team together, and we got it up to a point where they were ready for funding. And then I left in June of 2014, early June, late May. And then just kind of went into the wilderness for a while and decided, all right, well, do I want to stay in the space? I've kind of taken a little bit of beating. I've done a lot of interesting things and met a lot of interesting people, but I wasn't really prepared to be a cryptocurrency entrepreneur. It takes kind of a personality and a certain type of approach. So I said, yeah, I'll do one more venture. And so I went back to the drawing board and talked to people that I knew from the Bitshares days and people I knew from the Ethereum days. And I asked them, hey guys, if I was to do another venture, what should we do? And we all decided that the best idea would be to build a company that's kind of like a cryptocurrency factory. So, because the thing I really enjoy the most is designing cryptocurrencies and figuring out how to launch them and get all the code done and push it out. That's a lot of fun. And so we said, well, let's build a company that does that. So early in 2015, some of the guys from Ethereum and Bitshares, we all came together and we formed Input-Output in Hong Kong. And the basic idea of the company is to start from first principles, so start from academia, and kind of understand how cryptocurrencies work at a very deep level, and then work our way all the way up to full prototypes and then release them and focus on particular types of problems that we feel can evolve what's called cascading disruption. So what does that mean? It means that when we build something, we want to fundamentally change a marketplace. Like, for example, with Bitcoin, it fundamentally changed the notion of how value is moved around. We had this paradigm that you needed trusted third parties, you needed to use closed networks to send the messaging. It takes a long time, it's an expensive process. And then all of a sudden Bitcoin comes out and all those things were proven to be false. You don't need any central entities. You can do these as push transactions. They can be very quick, and you have no counterparty risk. So it changed everybody's paradigm, and it's forced the whole industry to respond to it. And even if Bitcoin doesn't become the ultimate winner, it's disrupted the industry so much that it's now reconfigured to a new format. So similarly, IOHK is a first principles company that builds cryptocurrencies, and we look for cryptocurrencies that once released will fundamentally change an industry. And even if that currency doesn't survive and some other standard wins out, the industry won't go back to its old format.
Right.
And so we've been running it now for about 2 years. We're getting ready to release our first product in probably December to January. It depends on a couple of market factors. And we've had tremendous success building relationships and partnerships. We have a partnership with Tokyo Tech. We have a partnership with guys at Kent University. We're going to be setting up a research center pretty soon up in Scotland, and we'll make an announcement there. We just recently brought on Agalos Kiasis as our chief scientist. He's a wonderful cryptographer. He's written 130 papers and probably one of the most rigorous guys in the space. And our current team size is over 30 people. The other thing that's really cool about our company is that we focus on functional development. So most of the people in this space, they write code in C++ or Java or JavaScript or something like that. And those languages are okay, but the reality is that we're dealing with high assurance software. And what that basically means is that, there's a lot of money behind these systems, and flaws or bugs can cause huge problems for a lot of people, and they're hard to fix. So you should pay the price of using a more exotic and probably more difficult language to develop in if the reward for that is less bugs and higher code quality and more conciseness and modularity. So all the code we write is in Haskell and Scala and languages like that. And we've had tremendous success. For example, we have a project called ScoreX, which is a kind of a pedagogical framework to study cryptocurrencies. And we've been able to re-implement Bitcoin with it as a test. And Bitcoin is 100,000 lines of C++ code. Our version is about 4,000 lines of Scala code. So it's 25 times less code, but it's easier to understand. It's more modular and actually faster. So there's a lot of cool things you gain from it. The downside is, of course, it's much harder to find qualified developers because there's just simply fewer of them, and they're more scattered throughout the world. So we actually now have personnel in 7 countries, and coordinating all of them is a huge task, and it's what keeps me up at night.
For the Haskell programming language?
Yeah, Haskell and Scala and other things. Scala is a little easier to find because a lot of the Java guys have moved into Scala, but Haskell has always been an academic language. It was actually created by an academic committee when they had some problems with Miranda and copyright issues. And so back in the 1980s, they came together and they brought all the brightest people they could find and said, okay, guys, figure out like the bestest programming language ever. And they did that, but bestest ever meant bestest ever for academics, type theorists and these other guys. But what happened was that their students ended up saying, wow, this is really cool, and we could probably do some really interesting industry things here. So they just kind of stuck with it for 30 years, and they built all this infrastructure and better compilers and other things. And now performance and development experience and libraries are at a production grade. So you actually can write real software in Haskell.
Currently, you're like the unofficial lead developer of Ethereum Classic. Is that a true statement or not?
I wouldn't say that's a fairly accurate statement. The reality of Ethereum Classic is that it's a bunch of different groups that have come together, and each and every one of them are philosophically motivated to be there. But it's important to understand there's no foundation, no one's being paid, there were no elections, no one's in charge. And in often cases, when you have a decentralized group of people that are working together, the ultimate deciding factor is the quality and merit of the ideas and how willing people are to execute on those ideas. So, like the Bitcoin core development, it's done by a federation of people all around the world. Blockstream has a lot of influence, so a lot of people try to say, they're the Bitcoin company. And I guess we would be the closest analogy to Blockstream for Ethereum Classic. But Blockstream can't unilaterally make decisions for the Bitcoin Core protocol and arbitrarily fork it anyway. If they could do this, we'd probably already have sidechains.
While developing for Ethereum Classic, are you doing that under the capacity of IOHK? Are you guys like doing that as a company, or is this something separate for you?
So we're going to do it as a company. So IOHK is behind Ethereum Classic. And really there are three lanes that we view that need to be satisfied for Ethereum Classic to be a successful project. So the first and the most critical lane was community management. So we hired Christian Severino and Carlo Vaccari, and we said, go out and just get the community going and make sure we get good data and we understand who's who and what people are doing. So Carlo does daily updates. We make sure there's weekly development reports out there. We make sure there's a newsletter. He's always on Reddit. He's always on Twitter. He does many podcasts, and I believe he's setting up a podcast. And he also polls the community. So he lives in Slack, and he's trying very hard to make sure that everybody's opinion is known. And he's kind of like a referee in that respect, a good community manager. Then Christian, he's got a PhD in physics, and he's a really bright guy. And we really needed a kind of an explainer in chief. So the reality is that Ethereum Classic is going to have to make decisions of where it wants to go and who it wants to be as a project. But it would be unfortunate if we tried to pull a Vitalik and just say, we're smarter than everybody else, and so trust me and just follow my lead. What I would much rather have is being able to explain the options clearly. Like, for example, with the consensus algorithm, we could stay with a proof of work. We could do a proof of work, proof of stake hybrid. We could push for sole proof of stake, and we have a good algorithm for that. We could do a hybrid consensus algorithm where it does proof of work to select a quorum, and then a federated algorithm like BFT Paxos to do the actual consensus. These are all different options, and they all have tons of pros and cons, and you will be able to find a qualified professor of cryptography that will be in a camp of each and every one of these and be able to give you a very strong argument. So it would be very unfortunate if our company or if somebody else just said, this is the way we're going to go, accept it. What I would much rather have is somebody explain these options in easy to understand terms and have a better conversation about the pros and cons. And that's kind of Christian's job. Is he tries to write an article every week, and he'll be on a podcast at some point with Carlo that we'll try to get done every week. And we can talk about different pieces of technology, whether they be a treasury system, the monetary policy, things like the consensus algorithm, changes to Solidity or the Ethereum virtual machine, and so forth. And the goal there is to make sure that that's explained in a way that everybody can understand without having a PhD in computer science, and can then actually have a valid opinion about, so that we don't mandate from the top. So that's the first lane. It's kind of Carlo and Christian, and they're doing a good job. And there's other people in the community who have stepped up, like Carlos, and a few others who have been working very hard at explaining what's going on. Now, the second lane, which is what you were asking about, is development. And so I don't personally do the development. I'm a CEO of a company. If I'm writing code, there's some serious problems. And so we are right now vetting 3 different dev teams to see which one. They're kind of competing against each other to see which one we want to bring on board. And our target is between 3 to 5 developers. And they're going to be Scala developers, and we're going to use our Scorx platform. And kind of the first implement a completely independent, 100% new code client for Ethereum Classic. So it'll be on par with Parity or on par with Geth and do everything those do, probably a little bit more because we like doing more. But at the same time, it's just completely new code. And my belief is that you have to do that to earn the right to have an opinion about where you should take the project. Because we have to understand the technology. I haven't seriously looked at Ethereum tech since 2014. I've kept up with announcements and updates and watched presentations, but I haven't looked at the code or seen or had detailed conversation with the core developers of Ethereum since June of 2014. So as a consequence, there's many decisions that have been made that are not documented, that are not publicly known, that are only there in the code and only there when you actually start building a client. So the first thing we have to do is build a client from the ground up. And then after we've done that, we'll have a pretty good sense of where the deficits are, what's missing. The other advantage we have is there's another team that's done this. Sergio Lerner, since that time in June of 2013, he joined Diego, and they created a company called Rootstock. And they're just about to release Rootstock in the next few months. And they've had tremendous success taking the Ethereum Java client and turning it into Rootstock. And they've done many incredible things, like they've gotten a 600% performance improvement on the Ethereum virtual machine. And Sergio is one of the best InfoSec guys in the entire Bitcoin space. So he's detected a lot of little problems here and there with the protocol and been able to fix and correct a lot of these things. So the key is to build our own client, collaborate with people like Rootstock and others. And in the process of that, we're going to be able to deliver something to the Ethereum Classic community that has a consistent, stable quality. It's 100% new code, and also gain a huge amount of organizational knowledge about what we need to improve for Ethereum Classic. Now, the final part, the final lane, is the R&D. I'm already aware of several problems that Ethereum has in terms of scalability and security. And the DAO hack revealed tremendous issues with how the computation model of Ethereum works. So we are collaborating with some people in academia already, and we've been implementing things like, for example, a hybrid proof of work, proof of stake algorithm, which we'll have out in November. Other things like that, new data structures. We have a new type of authenticated data structure that can go in the header that's significantly more efficient than Merkle-Patricia tries, and other things like that. And so we're going to do a lot of R&D, and once we have those things kind of fully spooled, we'll make some announcements, but they kind of feed into each other. Lane 2, the prototyping and development, will feed into the research side, and then eventually we'll get a nice workflow there where we can create a solid roadmap to diverge Ethereum Classic from Ethereum and make it its own product in its own right. And the first lane is really pivotal to this, because what's going to end up happening is we're going to come up with different paths that we could take, from monetary policy paths to paths about the level of centralization and decentralization of the network, paths about whether every node should be a first-class citizen or should there be heterogeneity. And it's not my place to make those decisions arbitrarily for Ethereum Classic. Rather, what I'd like to do is have a menu of options and then have a big community debate and see where the community wants to go with them.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of like a governance model is what you're somewhat referring to.
You're right. In the long term, I'd like to come up with a better one, and that's a long conversation unto itself.
Just because you mentioned it, the DAO, there are a lot of people who weren't so involved with Ethereum and the DAO at the time. And it's kind of hard to put the whole story together if you're on the outside looking in,
Right.
So I'm wondering if you can give us just a brief history of events that led to the creation of Ethereum Classic.
Well, there's a great timeline that sits on the Ethereum Classic website that can kind of take you through it. And there's numerous articles that have been written. But the most concise way of explaining the DAO is that a group of people got together, and it seems to me, this is just my opinion, it seems to me that they wanted to create a VC, but not any legal risk or liability associated with soliciting the funds for it. and then use the funds from that large pool to fund their operations. So they created a very clever construct called the DAO, which is 100% smart contracts, and they built it in a way to minimize personal liability at the expense of safety of the participants.
Yeah.
So instead of doing a sensible thing, which would have been a two-phase smart contract where one fed the other contract, they just kind of created a single contract and hoped to God that everything worked. And they went a little skimpy on InfoSec. And so as a consequence, when they deployed it, it turned out that there was a flaw. Somebody took advantage of that flaw and was able to withdraw a very large sum of money, about a third of the money that was sitting in the DAO contract. And this kind of put everybody in the Ethereum Foundation, as well as Slockit, the company that built the DAO, into a really bad position. Because on one hand, they had about 2 years of marketing saying things like code is law, no bailouts, transactions are not reversible, buyer beware, you have to accept the protocol at all costs. And they even created words for it like illegality. But on the other hand, a lot of people were personally involved in creating something that raised $150 million and then lost 50 of it. And if they did nothing, there was a strong perception that it would probably draw class action lawsuits, enforcement actions, potential criminal issues. It's hard to predict where these things would go. So they made a decision to intervene at the expense of the credibility of the marketing and of the goodwill of the ecosystem. So they did everything they could to try to justify the intervention, from a poll that only had 10% participation to kind of demeaning anybody who disagreed with them. And at the end of the day, they forked, thinking that they were successful. They declared victory, popped champagne, said, "Ha, we were right. This justifies everything. We can fork as much as we want." And then it turned out that the resistance formed, and Ethereum Classic was born, and it went through some tumultuous time. And then eventually people who agreed with the principle and philosophies that Ethereum was founded on, a lot of people went into Ethereum Classic, and we formed kind of a stable, nice, sustainable community. The challenge here is what does code as law actually mean? That this is kind of a contentious thing. It's a rather unfortunate statement, because you're actually talking about like two distinct things at the same time. You're talking about the code that runs on top of the protocol, and then you're talking about the protocol's design itself. So the way I like to think about it is saying that Ethereum, like all cryptocurrencies, has a social contract. And Bitcoin's social contract was no bailouts and no cronyism. The monetary policy is what it is, and all transactions are final. Deal with it, no matter how inconvenient it may be. And they've held their guns despite tremendous events. Over $1 billion worth of Bitcoins have been stolen throughout Bitcoin's history. A lot of Bitcoins have been lost. There's a certain CTO of a certain Bitcoin company that has 5,000 Bitcoins sitting on an iron key, which he's forgotten the password to, and he can't get them out. So he just sits every day and looks at that thing, hoping that one day he'll remember it so he can become a millionaire. This is the reality of the space that we're in. And so Ethereum inherited some of that, but then extended that philosophy to the protocols that run on top of Ethereum, and said that no matter if they're inconvenient to people or not, or what they're used for, it's not the concern of the protocol to intervene and censor contracts or intervene in reverse transactions and so forth. It's a very easy to understand notion. That does not mean if it's discovered that there's a critical flaw in the protocol that if unfixed will destroy the protocol, that you should not intervene to correct it. For example, there was a recent problem with accounts in Ethereum which dramatically degraded performance, and if left unfixed would probably cause a lot of issues in the protocol. That doesn't violate the code as law philosophy to correct that kind of a problem. All it's saying is we can't complete our social contract that we've established with our users if this thing is to persist. Do you want us to correct it or not? Of course, everybody says yes. Bitcoin had a similar problem. There was a flaw in Bitcoin script way back in the day, and if left uncreated, unfixed, people could create arbitrarily many Bitcoins. In fact, a person created several billion of them. So obviously they fixed that, or else Bitcoin as a system is worthless, because that flaw violated the social contract of Bitcoin.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so it's an interesting topic, and the philosophy of these two are becoming more clear over time. And actually, what's really cool about it is that, and this is what always happens with software and philosophy in general, is that everybody's together, they're having a kumbaya moment, they build something, and it finds out that the thing that they've built is much bigger and much more meaningful than they originally thought. The minute that that occurs, you have a schism, and basically it breaks into groups where each group has an opinion on where that technology should go and where it should be taken. Even like innocuous projects like Node have experienced this, where Node split into Node.js and io.js, or OpenOffice, it's split into LibreOffice, or MySQL split into PostgreSQL. So, all open source projects experience this, and those are just open source projects about things like databases and document management, editing systems, and stuff like that. When you add money and you add societal things and things like identity and reputation into the mix and regulation to the mix, you're bound to have philosophical disagreements. So I don't think Ethereum Classic is going to be the only contender that comes. We're going to see a whole wave of different smart contracting systems with different philosophies. And really the parameters that are going to vary are things about security and safety, things about privacy, things about mutability, things about scalability, and so forth. And every single one of these systems is going to have different opinions about that set of parameters. And it turns out that they can coexist with each other. Just because one becomes big doesn't necessarily mean it's actually at the expense of another. They can grow along different verticals completely independently of each other. And we can have a situation where both Ethereum and Ethereum Classic are billion-dollar systems with completely unique communities working with different types of dApps and solving different problems. And that's kind of my hope in the system.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because that was actually one of my questions that I was going to ask you. If Ethereum Classic and Ethereum would have the potential to coexist sometime in the future. By the sounds of what you said, the answer is yes.
Yeah, I think fights are sexy. The media loves these things. It's not good enough to say, hey, there's this open source project and they believe in X, Y, and Z, and there's this other open source project they believe in X, Y, and Z. They say, can we? Are they going to fight each other? Are they going to conflict with each other? Are they going to destroy each other? Because they always want to provoke the fight. It's Bitcoin versus this, Bitcoin versus that, Ethereum versus this. And so what's the next up and coming? And that's just the nature of the media. And that's just the nature of people. People want to anthropomorphize these projects into two guys in a boxing ring beating the crap out of each other and only one can win. The reality is that open source software is co-evolutionary. They learn from each other. So, when you have two guys in the smart contract game, we're going to have different philosophies. And we're going to find out which one is better for what types of tasks and applications. And just because I happen to be better in one doesn't mean I'm going to be good for all. And I might be able to take some tech that the other project has to dramatically improve my offering. Even Microsoft has learned this as a company. That's like the most anti-open source company historically. This company that called open source software cancer. Literally called it that in the 1990s and 2000s. Now they've open sourced .NET. They're talking about getting Ubuntu to run, the Bash shell to run in Windows. And they've really started collaborating with other people, and they're opening sourcing a lot of things because they realize there's a huge benefit to cross-pollination. It's not a competitive advantage to try to keep everything closed or everything in one silo or bucket. We all gain a lot more by working together. So my hope is for the projects to coexist. I think the problem right now is that there's just a lot of frayed emotions and very angry people. On the Ethereum Classic side, they feel like they were trivialized and diminished and not listened to, or they were frankly just lied to. When you tell people that you have a particular belief for several years, and then all of a sudden you can turn a 180 on it and walk away from it because it looks like there's some personally harmful thing that's going to impact you if you don't, then you can't complain that a group of people call you a hypocrite. Yeah. It's like saying you're a libertarian or something like that and being part of the Libertarian Party, and then all of a sudden saying, well, I just really don't like Hillary Clinton, so I'm going to have to vote for Trump this time because I just can't let her win. Your libertarian friends aren't going to be so happy about that, because what you've done is said, I'm going to throw away all my principles and go with the lesser of two evils because of this event that's ephemeral, that's occurring. So you can't complain about that. On the Ethereum side, they view the Ethereum Classic people, there's at least a meaningful percentage, as parasites, as thieves, as protesters, as people from Bitcoin trying to hurt Ethereum or damage Ethereum's growth potential. And usually those groups of people are the traders and speculators or the bag holders, the people who are in Ethereum to watch it appreciate and value. And rightfully, anytime they see something that they perceive could damage the market cap or damage the growth of Ethereum, they would obviously be against that. So I can understand those positions, and they're reasonable. And the only thing we can do is just be open, honest, and nice and transparent, work with anybody who wants to work with us, and gradually diverge the projects over time. And the longer that occurs and the more we do, I think the hostilities will eventually recede to a point where we probably can work together efficiently.
Nice. Do some collaboration.
I would hope.
We spoke a little bit about governance, and I know you said it's kind of a rabbit hole, and I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but from what I've heard, you've been recently exploring decentralized governance models. One of the projects you looked into was the Dash DGBB. I was wondering if you found any faults or shortcomings in that specific model.
Well, as with all protocols, there's always problems you're going to find when you look into it, and Dash certainly has a lot. For example, it looks like over 70% of the funding proposals have only gone to 2 people, we found just by looking at the statistics on Dash Central. And maybe that's because they were aggregating and a particular person would propose, but it's fair to say that there's a insider bias to allocation of funds. Yeah, that's probably reasonable considering that all projects start with a small group of people and they gradually diverge over time. There's limited incentive to participate in voting. There's limited incentive to go through a dynamic balloting process. Like there's no clear mechanics on how, when I propose a ballot, how a counter ballot can be proposed. Like for example, let's say, Bill, you want to do a show for Dash. You say, I need $8,000 a month worth of Dash to do this. Well, there's no mechanism for them to counter saying, we'll approve it if you accept 7, which is standard negotiations, and it's just not there in the system. So, and that's just because of the infancy of the protocol and also the complexity those types of systems introduce. As for logging, it looks like the ballots are logged via op return on the blockchain, but the actual metadata about the ballots is not preserved, it appears, anywhere in a decentralized capacity. That makes sense from a bloat capacity, but then it means you're reliant upon somebody logging that, usually in like Dash Central or a central database. So there's a lot of little things like that we've discovered, and there are probably more optimal ways of organizing a treasury. The other thing, a lot of parameters are just magic numbers. Like, why does it require 1,000 Dash to be a master node? Why not 1,500 Dash? Why not 500 Dash? It's a magic number. It's just an arbitrary parameter. The same for the amount of money that goes into the treasury. There's no grand economic model showing this is the optimal way of creating currency velocity. Right. It's just a parameter that they selected.
Kind of just pulled it out of their butt.
Yeah, but that's fine because you have to start somewhere when you want to do something. And I commend the Dash team for the progress that they've made in the things that they do. And now the burden is upon our company to learn from their mistakes and learn from their design and propose a better design. So we currently have a team of 5 people looking at it. They're doing a very first principles approach like most things we do. So they're going systematically through the code, the source code itself, which Dash is just a fork of Bitcoin with some things bolted on top. So there's some boilerplate there, and they're looking at the new stuff. And they're also going through all the documentation and so forth. And they've created a preliminary report that gave me a sense of how stuff works. We decided to keep that report private, and we're going to have another report that comes out with some proposed improvements. And that'll probably come out sometime in November. The reason why we kept the original report private is it just has criticism in it. And there's really nothing productive in releasing an analysis of a protocol with a lot of problems when you have no solutions. So it's like walking in and telling everybody that they suck at their job, and then out, it's like, okay, well, that guy's an asshole, I would much rather say, okay, we've discovered some issues and problems, and here's a new system we're proposing that could potentially solve a lot of these problems, because at least you can do something with the flaws that are discovered or the potential problems that are discovered. So that's kind of our goal.
I hope that they're open to your suggestions and feedback.
Well, they may or may not be, and actually I'd love to have a debate because it will expose what we know and what we don't know, and we can really get down to the bottom of how to make these systems better. Because ultimately it's in, frankly, every cryptocurrency's best interest to figure out how to handle the treasury in a decentralized capacity. This is kind of one of the 2 silver bullets you need to have total decentralization. Another problem with Dash is their marketing. They pretend like this treasury system is kind of the end-all be-all of governance, and it's not. It's one of 2 silver bullets, but it's not the other silver bullet. So it's great to have a funding source to fund media and ventures and other things. And frankly, it's more useful with Ethereum Classic than it is Dash, because the treasury can be used to fund the development of dApps, which is great. But the other silver bullet is forking the protocol. So we all run into this. Bitcoin was the first, and now everybody suffers from it. So you have protocol configuration X, and you want to move it to X2. Okay, well, that's going to be contentious, and there's a lot of decisions that have to be made there. So what is the process you follow to change the protocol from X to X2? You know, is this a meta process that happens in Reddit and Slack, and it's just whoever has the biggest mic and the most money and the most pushing? That's what occurred with the Ethereum Foundation fork, and what people attempted to do with the block size debate in Bitcoin. And there's various degrees of success, but you can see what happens is you always disenfranchise some group of people, and you create a lot of contention, potentially a completely new currency from the process. That is not a sustainable protocol. You cannot go to a large company and say, build real meaningful infrastructure on this. Oh, and by the way, every 2 or 3 years, we're going to have a dramatic fight, which will result in this protocol being split into 2 or more protocols and half the community hating each other.
Yeah.
They're going to say, yeah, that's great. Maybe next time, you know, and rightfully so. So the second silver bullet is, how do you create rules within the protocol itself that allow you to change the protocol to a new configuration in a way that the majority of the community will accept as reasonable? Now, there's a historical precedence for this. If you look at the U.S. Constitution, for example, they didn't just write the whole Constitution and say, this is the U.S. Constitution, it's perfect, it'll never be changed, good luck. They said, if you want to add to it, there's a process, and it's a well-defined, well-understood process. All constitutions have that. Similarly, there's a cryptocurrency project called Tezos. It's spelled T-E-Z-O-S. And Tezos actually has found a way to formally describe a protocol in terms of its network protocol, transaction protocol, and consensus protocol, as well as monetary policy, and give you a way to rigorously transform that into a different configuration and a balloting system to do that. That's the other side of governance, is the process to change things. Yeah. And that's actually the more traditional form of governance we think about, because usually what we do is we elect leaders, and the leaders take over the treasury and other mechanics and then make the decisions to change things. So in this case, we're kind of getting rid of the leaders, and we're now the Congress, we're now in charge. So part is treasury, and that's what Dash does, and it does it somewhat well, and we hope we can make some contributions to improve it. And then there's the idea of changing the protocol. That's the other silver bullet, and that's yet to be done. And Tezos is going to soon launch, and we'll gain some great data points from it. From our end as a company, we take that very seriously, and we're going to probably assign a team of 5 to 6 people full-time to do nothing but study that. And we're going to work very closely with game theorists, particularly people with experience in mechanism design, some people who have experience in political science, and work with some good cryptographers. And our hope is to propose a system by the middle part or the end of next year that's more abstract, that can be used in any cryptocurrency, including Bitcoin, if they were willing to hard fork and implement it. Nice. And our hope is to and everything we do is, of course, open source, but our hope is definitely to propose that for Ethereum Classic as well. I kind of consider those the capstones. So, you know, the first part of Ethereum Classic is just, how do we, you know, get a working client and prove we know what we're doing, because we have to earn credibility. The second part is, okay, let's solve the monetary policy issue, let's solve the consensus issue, and let's get some of these parameters locked down so people have stability and they know that things aren't going to change much beyond that. And then the final part is, how do we plan for long-term sustainability? We're not, in my view, it's not a good idea to start another foundation. It's like, we're going to solve the agency failures and corruption of the prior group of people by forming another group of people, and let's hope that they have more virtue than the last group. That's insane. You don't solve the problem that you've had by doing the same thing over again. So my hope is the third thing is that we can install something like a much improved Dash treasury model and a much improved version of what Tezos is bringing to the table, and use that to kind of finish off Ethereum Classic. Now, if we're successful, that means I could die. I could completely go away. IOHK could disappear. You know, a rapture occurs and we all go to hell or something. I don't know. But then Ethereum Classic is still around. It still has a governance structure. It still has money to spend. It still has a vibrant ecosystem. And the rules are predictable and immutable. People know what to expect. Then we can go to a big company like a Microsoft or an IBM or a Deloitte and say, Why would you want to build on a platform that has the whim and will of a few people, and every time there's a problem, there's a fight, when you have a platform where not only do you understand the rules, you can be a member who participates in these things and brings value to it. Oh, and by the way, the protocol itself can pay you to do an integration. That's a very powerful thing. If I'm an ATM guy, I now can go to a treasury and get ATM integration for that currency for by a ballot. I could, if I'm Trezor or KeepKey and I want to support Ethereum Classic, I can get paid to do that from the currency itself. There's all these great use cases that fall out of having a model like that, especially if it's easy to use and easy to understand, and it allows the system to grow in a rapidly decentralized way, in a fair way that eschews cronyism or exposes it.
Right. And it's kind of happening a little bit in Dash already, with these outside companies coming in and getting funding.
Right. Yeah, the other 29% is definitely great. Like I think Amanda got funded from that. And then even cool little things, like one of the coolest things for Dash was when they created a wallet in Slack, and that was funded from Dash. And like little stuff like that, it doesn't seem to be big, but the reality is that the aggregation of those little fine details is what makes a great community and a great ecosystem. Yeah, and so I love seeing that stuff, and you can't plan for that stuff. What ends up happening is you inspire somebody, you get them very passionate, and they have that skill, and they come to you, and they say, hey, can I go build this? Now, if you're one guy or a small organization, you don't have the resources to entertain all of that. But if you have a decentralized decision-making system that grows proportionally with the participants, then you now have unlimited resources, because every time people come in, they're also providing resources. So it grows very quickly. Every protocol that does this tends to grow fast. Just look at BitTorrent. They created a model where when you share, you also consume, and you consume, you also share. And all of a sudden now a third or more of the internet traffic is carried on the BitTorrent protocol, and it completely redefined content distribution. And it wasn't because Bram Cohen started a Microsoft-sized company and crammed it down everybody's throat. It's because he had the right growth model and the right incentive model and made it really easy to use. Similarly, if you want a good governance system, you need to have an easy-to-use treasury system and an easy-to-understand forking protocol with a healthy and vigorous debate that moves slowly and methodically.
Certainly. Switching gears real fast, I'm wondering what you think about all this hype building up around the ZeroCoin technology.
Well, Zooko and I kind of live in the same town. I'm from Boulder, and Zooko lives there as well. And we had Sushi a few months ago. He's a good guy, and he's a really good engineer. He's like an average cryptographer and an exceptional engineer. And by the way, to be an average cryptographer, you have to be a really bright guy. So then to be a good engineer on boot, you have to be really, really bright. So I have the utmost respect for Zooko's abilities, and he's now wearing the hat of businessman. He's doing a pretty good job with it. And really the magic of ZeroCash is they've put together a great team of people like Andrew Miller and others to kind of help them navigate what does privacy mean. Now, as with all people who are pioneers, you are obviously going to run into a situation that you're defined more by the things you didn't do and the problems you had than the things you did. And that's great because you learn a hell of a lot. Just like this is kind of like, for privacy and cryptocurrencies, our Mosaic moment. Mosaic was like one of the first web browsers. It was the first to really show this whole notion of web browsers, but it certainly wasn't Netscape or Internet Explorer. So the actual, how are we really going to do this well, or how do we make this efficient? All that stuff is going to be figured out later. So I'm very happy from one perspective that ZeroCash has brought snarks, privacy-based snarks, to the conversation and really found a way to get them to work in production. And the value of ZeroCash is going to be what we learn from it, what we learn from a regulatory perspective. In fact, I think there was an Italian MP that already proposed banning ZeroCash. That's really fast government, considering that ZeroCash just got released. Yeah. And there's certainly going to be responses from exchanges and banking institutions and other people about how they interpret ZeroCash and whether it's tradable or not. So there's certainly going to be a regulatory discussion that's now going to be held. The second discussion is a technological discussion, and that always gets better. I mean, we're going to see massive improvements in efficiency, and we're going to see other things like, for example, removing the trusted bootstrap and other such things kind of fall out of studying ZeroCash. And then there's going to be competitors. And this is the most exciting thing to me. There are different ways to achieve anonymity, and there's different forms of anonymity. For example, we tend to think of anonymity more as a referential to ourselves. So Charles Hoskinson joins Network X, and does Network X expose or conceal my identity? In other words, can you link if it's concealed back to me? So with Bitcoin, there are pseudonymous addresses. And we've discovered that, with some effort and some clever work, you can link those addresses back to Charles Hoskinson. The value proposition of ZeroCash is saying that linkability is basically impossible. But this doesn't necessarily mean that you hide the transaction size. That's a different kind of anonymity. That's financial anonymity. So, if I'm an investigating agency, I'm going to care a lot more about the $10 million transaction than I care about the $1 transaction. So just because both of these have the same level of anonymity in terms of linkability back to the person doesn't necessarily mean they should enjoy the same level of anonymity in terms of obfuscation of amounts. So there's different technology like confidential transactions, for example. And there's the entirely new different anonymity schemes using older cryptographic primitives like ring signatures, for example, which is what Monero is known for. So I think they're going to see a lot of competition. We have a guy that is quite good, and we're going to invest probably moderately, not as heavily as we invest in treasury and forking, because we think those are more useful problems to solve. But we will invest somewhat moderately in privacy, and we're going to come up with, as a company, our opinion on what is the right balance. The other thing is also data anonymity. So, it's one thing to say that the currency is anonymous, but there's another thing entirely to say, can the nodes who participate in the system be anonymous as well? Like, are we going to merge Tor together with the network or something like that? So it's hard to distinguish where people are actually at. That's really important if the currency gets banned. For example, let's say you come up with ZeroCash, and then Iran says ZeroCash is the worst thing ever, and we're going to ban it. Then it's not good enough to protect that person's privacy in terms of knowing they own the account if their IP address gets exposed, because you can still find them. You can still identify them, go and kill them or arrest them or something like that. So it's really important also to have a discussion about how do we handle the privacy of the individual through the whole stack, from the transaction size to the transaction linkability to the IP data that's leaked. And so ZeroCash will expose where it's strong and where it's weak in that respect, and there's going to be a predictable flood of people who counter it. To be honest, though, I think ZeroCash is premature in a certain respect. So you don't go to a Navy SEAL bar as a short, scrimpy guy, walk up to the Navy SEAL and punch him in the face and expect to do pretty well in that fight. This whole notion of punching above your weight. And the problem with ZeroCash is it's going to pick a fight with government entities. It's forcing the issue. So they're going to go up to him and say, we're totally anonymous, neener, neener. And then the response will be, no exchange can list you if they want to keep their banking relationships and their exchange licenses. And then all of a sudden you have this liquidity crisis where you have it exists, but it's really difficult for cash in and cash out. And it kind of becomes almost like a digital drug in a certain sense. And you have to have this underground economy to trade it. To me, it's much more meaningful to focus on what we try to do with Bitshares, focusing on decentralized exchange and value stable currency, because if you can pull that off, then you completely opted out of the need for banking and exchanges altogether. I never need to really leave crypto land because I have assets that are value stable and are as good as cash. And once people realize they're as good as cash, you will see a massive amount of trading in decentralized hubs materializing that governments can't shut down. It's just like file sharing. If you look at the model, we had Napster, and that was a very easy and sexy target to attack. And then, of course, they did. Then BitTorrent comes out. How the hell do you attack 5 million people or 10 million people or 20 million people using a protocol? You can try, but eventually they had to throw in the towel and give up suing 12-year-olds and do something differently. Similarly, if you have decentralized exchange and value stability in your assets, then you'll have 5 or 10 or 20 million exchange and trading points. And then all of a sudden it's impossible to go after them, no matter what they're doing. So then you add anonymity on top of that. So it becomes a pyrrhic and, frankly, impossible task for a government to ban something like ZeroCash because there's no enforcement mechanism which they can use as a lever to punish people. It becomes something they just have to accept, like they've accepted BitTorrent.
The
Go ahead.
goal is to not really give them the option to shut it down.
Right, you have to be very strategic. That said, the genie's out of the bottle. Zooko's released it. His engineers are very good. I think they're going to be very reactive and be able to change things appropriately. And we're all going to learn a hell of a lot from it. And I hope the conversation is very deep and meaningful. The other thing that ZeroCash kind of pioneered is a slightly different funding model from a traditional ICO. So we're going to see how that funding model fares as well, and maybe it's a better model than other ICOs. So every time these things get released, there's kind of a good, a bad, and an ugly, and we all learn from it. And overall, they kind of give you a lot of data points to, as an entrepreneur, build your own products on top of. Even the DAO, which was a spectacular failure from one lens, was actually a great success from another lens because it proved that there was a demand for a decentralized VC. The Dash Treasury and the DAO are actually kind of one and the same. It's a decentralized pool of capital that has a voting system for a group of people to make decisions about propositions of funding. The only difference is where does the capital come from in the case of, and who gets to vote. So in the case of Dash, it's built into the protocol itself, and DAO is built on top of the protocol. But these have kind of two different opinions about the same type of problem. So we're going to learn a lot from their failures or successes, and eventually we can come up with better systems. And once those systems are there, they just become self-evident. They propagate very quickly, and everybody asks, well, why don't we have this? And everybody ends up getting it.
I'm wondering what your outlook on the entire crypto industry in the next 5 to 10 years is.
Well, I think what's going to end up happening, and that's a great question to ramble about for like 20 minutes, right? It's so I'll try to keep it concise. Really, I think the most productive thing to do is to kind of break it down via industries. So I like looking at this whole thing in terms of two worlds, the developed world and the developing world. In the developed world, I think we're going to see more regulation. We're going to see slight more centralization via federation. And we're going to see kind of an accepted business model for what a cryptocurrency company is and what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. And it's going to kind of become boring in a certain sense. And we're already starting to see that with things like Corda, and Juno, and so forth, and companies like Eris and others, which, they do stuff and they're valuable things, and they certainly innovate, especially in things like accounting and supply chain management and auditing and fraud protection. Okay, that's great, but it's boring. It's not really sexy and exciting. And you're not going to see a lot of really cool new things because what's going to happen is the regulatory footprint is going to grow larger and larger, and it's going to squeeze the augurs and these other guys out at some point. And that's just my view. Where it's going to be really sexy and exciting is the developing world, in my view, because these guys, they don't have an identity system. They don't have a reputation system. They don't have a good remittance infrastructure. They don't have a good lending infrastructure. They don't have any banking infrastructure. Go to Cambodia, less than 2% of people have bank accounts. They don't have any of the things we take for granted. They don't have insurance. It's just not there, and they need it. And they're getting money. Look at how fast Vietnam's economy is growing, or any of these Asian economies are growing, or even the African economies. We all have this vision that Africa is this perpetually poor, terrible place. But the reality is, it's like Nigeria are growing very quickly. Ethiopia is growing quickly. Kenya is growing quickly. There's a lot of money there. A lot of new millionaires are being created. So there's this huge demand to have a proper financial stack. But they have a huge luxury that the developed world does not have. They don't have these super capitalized, centuries-old financial incumbents that basically force people into a particular mode of thought. So if you want to innovate, go to the developing world. You'll have a chance to basically come up with a new identity system. You'll have a chance to work with governments in a level and capacity you never thought possible. Like, for example, one of our projects, we're working in the Philippines on something, and we may be able to get an entire regulatory stack built for a particular product in a matter of months or years. Whereas this would take huge political connections and lobbyists and all these other things in a very slow thing. Maybe 5 years you'll have a chance. We could potentially do it months. So you have so much more room to innovate, and it's so much more meaningful. The other thing is you're talking about orders of magnitude access and cost reduction. So I can put a whole bank, identity system, voting system, asset management system, trading system, all on a cell phone. And I can have a good user experience with that within 2 to 3 years. So in the next 5 to 10 years, if people get this in their head that there's a huge opportunity for that, we're going to see a lot of really bright entrepreneurs go into the developing world, partner with them and build great protocols that are provably secure, that give these services in a completely transparent and decentralized way to people in the developing world. And I think what's going to end up happening is we're going to have an anaconda effect. So, and my analogy is Microsoft. So Microsoft in the 1990s was so powerful that if you were getting venture capital, the VCs would say, what is your Microsoft strategy? Because it is like your whole world had to revolve around the sun, and the sun was Microsoft. And now, who asks you what's your Microsoft strategy? Entrepreneurs don't even use Microsoft products. They're using Linux and Mac and Google Docs and shit like that. It's like Microsoft's dying to try to get people to come in. Was there some sort of cataclysmic event where they woke up one day and 90% of Windows users disappeared? No. Windows is still a tremendously successful product, and the product lines of Microsoft, like Office, are tremendously successful. What happened was that the world grew around them. This new model of computation, the cell phone, came up, and they had almost no penetration. And this new model of interaction, social media, came up, and this new model of computer use, search, came up. And all these things were not Microsoft, and they grew organically, and they surrounded and swarmed Microsoft to a point where they're being kind of squeezed to death. And they don't know how to get out of the box, and they've spent billions of dollars trying to get out, and they can't. I think the same thing's going to happen in the banking industry, where there is a cronyistic, unfair, very top-heavy, corrupt, massive financial system that lives in Western Europe and America and other places. And any person who believes they're going to walk in there and drain that swamp is deluding themselves. It's easier to get a bullet in the back of the head. It's just not going to happen. But if the developing world all of a sudden has a completely new financial stack, it lives on their cell phone, and it's zero cost to access or something like that, it's fair, it's transparent, it's corruption-free, those people will be more competitive, and they're going to become richer. And there's going to be eventually billions of people in that stack. And it's going to, like cell phones, grow around the financial system and start squeezing it. And then what's going to happen is that corrupt financial system is going to have to fundamentally change itself, or else it will die. Just like Microsoft now has to fundamentally change itself as a company and stop being Windows-centric, monopolistic, open sources, poison. Now they're actually one of the most innovative companies around, and they're partnering with more people and deploying, some cases, products on iPhone before they deploy it on their own platforms.
Right.
And if you talk to somebody 10 years ago and said Microsoft would start doing that, they would think you're mentally ill. They think your vision of the world is insane. Similarly, you're going to see JP Morgan Chase actually embracing decentralized systems that they can't control. If and only if we see growth in the developing world. That's the opportunity to kind of pull an Android play on the financial world. So that's my hope. I would love to see the cryptocurrency space move in that particular direction. I think we have a lot of challenges ahead. They're kind of divided in different categories. One challenge is the pedagogy and first principles. And that's one thing that our company focuses extremely heavily on. The reality is we all have different terms. A lot of people in the space are very young, so they don't understand that there's a long legacy in computer science, and a lot of the problems they're trying to solve have already been solved, but just using different vocabulary and different ways. So there has to be a strong effort to integrate what we've learned into academia and get all that standardized and get people all thinking about the right problems and asking the right questions. So we're doing that by setting up research centers and doing that by using ScoreX as kind of our framework to get that pedagogy out. But other people will have their ways of doing it. And our hope is that's one thing that needs to get solved, because you have to train the next generation of people who enter the space and are capable of doing it. And by the way, you need to do that in a way that's accessible to everyone, not just rich white kids in Silicon Valley. The second thing is that we have to get beyond, and the internet had this problem too, we have to get beyond the pump and dumps, and we have to get beyond the scams and all these people who are basically just here to make a quick buck. You know, it's kind of ironic that we've invented a new type of money, and it's shown how frankly imaginary money really is. If some anonymous hacker can create a token that ends up being worth 700 times that of the US dollar in just less than 10 years, why the hell do we believe money is this special thing and we should devote our lives to chasing it? Yeah. It's a lie, it's a trap, it's an illusion. So you see a lot of people in the space who don't have any original ideas, they're just here to ride the gravy train. And again, because everybody's so young, we tend to pretend that that's unique. But the reality is every single time you have an innovative new technology that appears, no matter what period of history you're in, you will be swarmed by charlatans. The internet had it. Look at the pets.com and all these other companies that had massive amounts of VC that they got, no productive output, no business plan, no way of actually making money. And of course they collapsed. And it was just all about enriching the founders. It had nothing to do with the actual building of a good business. But from those ashes, we got PayPal and Amazon and Google and Facebook and all these monolithic massive companies that have fundamentally changed their world. So just because you have scams and charlatans doesn't invalidate the model. It just means it's something you have to combat and grow out of over time. And the natural antidote is just education. People learn over time. So eventually the one coins will go away and we'll get to a more sustainable point. The last thing, and this is the last mile. Every industry has this. In the telecom industry, like fiber optic is awesome, but we can never get the damn thing to the person's house. It's the last mile. And there's a lot of other things like that. The problem is that if this is going to be useful and actually get to that vision of the anaconda strangling the banking system, we need to get it on cell phones. The problem is the way the protocols are developed, the cryptography, the way people get software on phones is not optimal at the moment for cryptocurrencies. They're really built from a server and a desktop-centric view of the world, where these things are much more open and you have infinite resources. So a lot of advancements have to be made in the cryptographic sense, in the software sense, and also on the deployment sense to figure out how to get these things onto cell phones in a way that has a great user experience. And that's also a safe user experience for the users, because you have so much more control over your money, and that can at times be very dangerous, as people have discovered. So I think that's the other challenge that's before us as a space, and no one has really come up with a silver bullet for that. Our chief scientist came up with something called proof of work, which is an attempt to make validation and other things easier in the SPV environment. And there are new data structures that people are developing that make SPV bootstrapping easier, but it's still a humongously complex problem, and it's going to take quite a bit of time to solve. And frankly, I think that's going to be the last problem to solve. We're going to probably see crypto winter come, and these ICOs and these charlatans are going to gradually burn themselves out like a plague that burns itself out. Okay, they'll go away. And then, the other category we'll resolve first principles at some point. There's going to be somebody who wins in that conversation, and we all have different opinions on what should be focused on. Those two will organically resolve themselves. But the third one, the mobile side of things, there is no implicit incentive at the moment to get that finished. You really need an iPhone moment. You need some company to have enough courage to invent the model and propagate that model out there, and then show everybody that there's tremendous value. Or else everybody's just going to exist in the old paradigm of, well, this is the way we'll gradually get there. We'll start in the developed world and gradually move into the developing world, and that you accomplish nothing in that type of viewpoint. So we'll certainly be competitive in that, and we'll invest some resources in it. And I hope to come back next year and tell you how we have found the silver bullet and we know what to do. But I don't think I'm hubristic enough to make that claim. I appreciate it, Bill. So what's kind of your outlook on the whole thing? It's a great two-party question.
I might be one of those charlatans. I hate banks, I guess.
You seem intelligent enough to get it done.
Like I'm looking for a better way to do all this. And when I found out about central banks and the Federal Reserve, it just kind of pissed me off that that's actually how it is. My hopes is that the world can change. I just don't think what we have right now is actually it.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And most people came to the cryptocurrency space as a consequence of it. I mean, the 2008 financial crisis was a horrible event, but it was a great event from a different perspective. Like, there's no such thing as a universally bad event. Like, I'm right now taking this great class on from the great courses on the Black Death. I've gotten about 11 lectures into it, and it's just fascinating. It killed like half of Europe. And you'd think that that's a universally bad event, but the reality was that it cleaned up the political systems and institutions of Europe and made them ready for the Renaissance. So if the Black Death hadn't occurred, we'd probably be 200 or 300 years behind on social progress. Yeah. So every time something bad happens, it's also an opportunity for something else to change. So similarly, 2008 devastated the world financial market, but it caused a lot of people to start questioning the nature of money and fractional reserve banking and how the world system is set up. Because we had this idea that there's these institutions and they all kind of just know what they're doing and they're figuring it out. whatever. And then all of a sudden we find out that they're no smarter than us. And in many cases, they're actually making purposely bad decisions because they make them with bias. There's some group of people that they're making those decisions for, and it's not us. So, we saw the Ron Paul movement form, and the Liberty movement, and then the Occupy Wall Street movement, and other movements. And now the pirate party's taking over Iceland. We're now seeing fallout. And I think Bitcoin is kind of a technological answer to this type of corruption. And what's really cool is that it unifies so many different types of people. I'm a mathematician, and I look at the world a little differently than most people do. But, one of my best friends in this space, his name is Brian Goss, and he's a doctor. He's a radiologist.
Yeah.
You wouldn't expect a radiologist to be like a hardcore crypto guy, but he is.
Take a wild guess at what my actual job is.
What is your job? I don't know.
I work in construction.
Right. Well, that's the thing, is that this financial movement has allowed somebody in construction to actually have a meaningful say on where we're going to take the world's money system.
Right.
You didn't have to go to Princeton and get a degree in economics and go win a Nobel Prize and be in a certain political circle and be invited by the president to sit on a board or something like that. A guy working construction somewhere in the United States can have just as much of an impact and say as Ben Bernanke could have.
I actually enjoy my time I spend volunteering in the crypto industry, and I just feel good about it.
Right. And the other thing, too, is that people forget money is a social contract. There's a great book by David Graeber. It's called Debt, the First 5,000 Years. And it really exposes this. And there's also another book called The Ascent of Money, I think by Niles Ferguson or something like that. And basically, when you start reading these things, you start realizing that the only reason money works is because we personally accept it to work and work for it. But it doesn't really matter if it's dollars or cigarettes or, rye stones or something like that. It's all a social contract. So it's preposterous to say that the only people who have a say on that social contract should be a small committee of prestigious bankers with good credentials. If I'm going to accept it, work for it, spend my life, the time that I have, which is no less precious than other people's time, I should have some sort of say on what I accept and what I don't accept. And we should never accept that type of control if people come in and try to tell us otherwise.
Construction Bill should have a say in this.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And I think the system has failed if we don't. So it's really cool that we now have a chance to build money. I mean, like there's over 1,000 altcoins. They all do different things. Some are scams and other ones are legitimate products. But yet the fact that it has good tech or bad tech doesn't make it a scam. It's all about the intent of the community and the willingness of the community to accept it and use it. Bitcoin, pound for pound, if you look at its tech compared to other cryptocurrencies, there are certainly far, far more advanced cryptocurrencies on the plate who have made much better design decisions. Yet Bitcoin is stronger only because it has a strong community who accept it, do things. And there's some people who live 100% in Bitcoin. They won't touch fiat. They've actually done pretty well because they made those decisions when it was dollar Bitcoin, so they've become rich. So I think that's really cool that we can build these types of systems and build great communities around them. And I hope we just get better ways of coordinating the communities and communicating with them. It's like with Ethereum Classic, the first thing that I did is I didn't go and just try to hire a bunch of developers and say, let's go do something. I said, God, the first thing we need to do is community management. We need to bring in somebody just to talk to people and figure out who our community is and what they want. Or else it's going to end up being just another dictatorship where whoever has the money and the power decides where to go and forces everybody to accept it. And I can either build a cult of personality and try to get them on board, or rule with a hammer and say this is your only option, or we could do something better and transcend that and try to build a system where it's ruled from the bottom up. And I hope we can have money systems in the future that are like that. If Bitcoin has done anything, I hope that that's the lasting impact, as it teaches people that we can be in control of our own financial future, and we have a say in the money that we operate in and how we do things.
I really appreciate you coming on the interview, Charles. Did you have any closing comments or questions you wanted to share with the listeners?
Yeah, just a couple of housekeeping things. One thing is for Ethereum Classic, if you want to participate or do anything, I'd highly recommend you reach out to Carla Vicari. give you for your show notes an email address to reach out to them. But anything you want to do, a project, or if you want somebody to know where the project's at, or any of the things, just talk to him. He's kind of the center point, and he knows everybody and everything and can get you into the right location. If you have questions about technical stuff, Christian is always a resource available to people, and I'll give that email address as well. For other projects that we work on, IOHK loves collaborating with researchers. So if you're a cryptographer or computer scientist and you have a really cool idea, send me an email, and I can put you in contact with our chief scientists and our people, and there's maybe a way to collaborate together. We also are on the lookout for great new projects like QAditas and Tezos and other things. And if it's a really, really cool project, we might even be willing to commit development resources. So if you have some project ideas or things that you've done that you think are legitimately going to make a huge difference, do send an email to me. And I'm always available for questions in general.
Awesome. And I'll link to all the resources that you're going to provide me in the description of the podcast.
All right. Brilliant. Thanks, Bill. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks again,
Cheers.
Charles. Take care, man.
Bye-bye.